9 players we are all in on for the 2024 fantasy football season are my guys, our flag plants, whatever you want to call them. 9 players we have to have in our fantasy football drafts this year. Cameron, I'm going to have you kick us off here. Who is your first flag plant for the 2024 season?
You had to know one of us was going to choose him, but it's Kyler Murray. And we have talked about Kyler Murray probably more than any other player this offseason on the podcast, especially, and even in our short form content. I feel like each of us have made multiple videos, including Kyler Murray as one of the best steals, one of the best values, because he's all of those things. He's going as a quarterback 9 at the 708 currently on Sleeper. And that just blows my mind. I tried to find some new stats because, like I said, we've talked about him so much, and I didn't want to just regurgitate the same stats over and over to you guys. But since 2020, 15 QBs have had over 500 rushing yards in a year. Of those 15, 12 finished top 8 and 10 finished top 6. The reason I bring up 500 rushing yards, Kyler was on pace for 518 rushing yards last season, and that was coming in halfway through the season off an ACL tear. Right, so that is probably the worst rushing conditions for Kyler, and he was still going to hit 500 rushing yards. The 3 quarterbacks who weren't top 10, Justin Fields last season. This is in points per game. Justin Fields last season. Cam Newton on the Patriots, and Daniel Jones, who was quarterback 11 in points per game. Or no, sorry, that weren't top 8. Daniel Jones finished quarterback 10. So Kyler Murray and he was 2 of those quarterbacks, by the way. In 2021, he finished as the quarterback 4 in points per game. And in 2020, he was a quarterback 3 in points per game. So we've already seen it from him twice where he could finish as a top 4 quarterback. We know that the history is on his side as far as rushing goes. And he doesn't need a good passing season with his rushing upside to be an elite quarterback. In his career, he's never thrown for over 4,000 yards, and he's never thrown for over 26 passing touchdowns. And like I've said, he's finished as the quarterback 3 and quarterback 4 in points per game already. And last season, he was on pace for 38 passing touchdowns and 3,800 passing yards and 22 passing touchdowns coming off an ACL with no Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, I understand if you're out on drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. this season, that's fine. But he's a generational prospect who we can't understate the help he's going to have for Kyler Murray, like the help he's going to have for this offense in general. The rushing upside for Kyler, it's just silly that he's still the quarterback 9. It's silly that he's not a top 6 quarterback. And I talked about yesterday on the mock draft. I wanted to draft Kyler 3 rounds ahead of ADP, but I didn't because I've taken him in every single other mock draft we've done. Like, that's how much Kyler Murray I am drafting right now.
Kyler is this special blend of he's not purely rushing upside like a Lamar Jackson, like a Jalen Hurts. He does have this rare ability to sling it for 4,000 yards. Now, he hasn't hit that mark, but he has the ability to. You also give him, like, think about when Kyler was playing with DeAndre Hopkins, how much we all loved him for fantasy football. Like, that's what you're reinserting into this Arizona Cardinals offense with Marvin Harrison Jr., a now emergent Trey McBride, a good run game. I mean, this run game was efficient last year. I think the Cardinals are going to be, a top 15 unit in the league this year, where in past years you're like, well, I hope this offense can put something together. Otherwise, Kyler Murray's going to have to be Superman. Now he doesn't have to be Superman. He just has to be a very good NFL quarterback, which will produce fantasy points. Ty, why do you love Kyler Murray this year? Because we could sing his praises all episode long.
It really comes down to, you look at quarterbacks with the rushing upside element to their game. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson. What do they all have that Kyler hasn't had in the past? It's the supporting cast. Like, this was the last piece of the puzzle that we have been wanting, hoping for, praying for over the last 3 years. And yes, like, Kyler's had his fair struggles with health and all those kind of things. But this is where everything has pretty much come together this year. So at the worst, you're maybe a year early on Kyler being like a top 5 option, but it feels like we're drafting him at his floor at the quarterback 9 because of his skill set and his situation.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what I love is his lowest finish is quarterback 8 in points per game. we're drafting him at the quarterback 9 with a better offense. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, I agree, Ty. You're drafting him at his floor.
The math does not math in this scenario, which is why I mean, again, if Cameron didn't take him, Tyler or I would have taken him, because he is a guy where many people have commented on our shorts. So we have done mock drafts, how to draft from each spot. At least in 7 of those 12 videos that we made, I think we've taken Kyler Murray as the quarterback, because in the 7th round, he is such a value. And admittedly, in redraft leagues, his ADP is rising, but still you're drafting him at his floor with quarterback 8 behind Dak Prescott, right in the same range as Jordan Love. A guy, Jordan Love, we all like as well, but Kyler Murray, with his mobility, with a better offense, with a better supporting cast in the passing game, has the ability to shatter fantasy football again, just as he did previously in his career. So Kyler Murray is Cameron's flag plant number 1. Tyler, who's your flag plant number 1?
It's Isaiah Pacheco. I kind of fell head over heels for the guy in our mock draft episode yesterday when he fell to me in the 3rd round of drafts. There is too much good to ignore when it comes to Isaiah Pacheco this year. You can generalize it by saying he's in a great offense with minimal competition. You take a look at this Chiefs offense since Mahomes became the starter, they have historically been top 5 in scoring and in yards. Last year was the first year outside of the top 10. I feel like the question that we need to ask is, are we in for a bounce back? And everything that the team has done this offseason, knowing the talent that is already there with the coaching, why would we not be in for a bounce back with this offense, right? You look at the wide receiver core, you've got Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, who, yeah, he'll miss the first couple weeks of the season, but he should be back then by like week 5 at the bare minimum. And Rashee Rice, whose suspension will likely come next year at this point. That core of wide receivers is better than what Mahomes has had since he started. Yeah, maybe it lacks the Tyreek Hill caliber wide receiver, but you've got talent all over the offense now that defenses have to account for. And oh yeah, by the way, he still has one of the best, if not the best tight end in the game in Travis Kelce, right? So there are a lot of scenarios that will come for Isaiah Pacheco where defenses are going to be spread out trying to account for every blade of grass. And that's just going to help Isaiah Pacheco out, sets up some big play opportunities. Isaiah Pacheco was already top 12 in breakaway run rate last year. He honestly, the situation is too good to ignore. Last year, even in their struggles, he was 7th in red zone touches. He was 12th in yards created. He got hurt towards the end of the year, but he came back in week 16. From that point until the Super Bowl, he was the running back 5 in expected fantasy points per game with 18.4. 18.4. He was putting up 3 to 4 expected receptions per game as well, so the receiving work was still there. He was putting up roughly 75 expected rushing yards per game too. That should all continue because, again, they didn't bring anyone back. They didn't bring anyone else in the draft or anything like that. So with Isaiah Pacheco's utilization in this offense as a workhorse back with receiving work, being heavily featured in the red zone, what is there not to like about Isaiah Pacheco? So I find myself saying, yeah, I'll take Isaiah Pacheco anytime that I can in mock drafts, in best ball drafts, no matter what the format is. Give me Isaiah Pacheco like 10 times out of 10 this year.
So I will give you your flowers as well, Ty, because you were in on Isaiah Pacheco last year before it was cool to be in on Isaiah Pacheco. Well, I guess people were all over him in his rookie season, but you were a guy last year where you're like, I actually think we're just severely underrating him. And I think what happened with Isaiah Pacheco last year for me was he proved to me that he is a good NFL running back. It wasn't just a rookie campaign, 7th round. Are we sure they're going to keep him around? No, he proved that he is a good quality NFL running back last year, and we're keeping the equation simple here. You draft good players on good NFL teams, and the Chiefs are going to be one of the best teams in the league this year. It's as simple as that. Cameron, where do you weigh in on Isaiah Pacheco? I know you're not as big of a fan as Ty, but give me your thoughts.
I've really started to come around on Pacheco. He was the guy that I was like, I don't think he's going to be top 10. I think but it's just like, I'm like, why did I not think that? Like, he's good when he's on the field and he's on, like you said, one of the best teams in the league. Last season, Chiefs scored 39 touchdowns total. That was a bad year for them. In the 3 years prior, they didn't have a single season below 55 total touchdowns. The 39 is the outlier. 55 is the norm. So, like, if they return anywhere near the norm, that's just whatever, 16 more touchdowns. Obviously, not going to all go to Pacheco, but if he gets, 4 of those, all of a sudden you're feeling really good about where you're drafting him. And, the dude might run funky and look like he's trying to murder the ground with every step. But, I mean, he gets the job done, and he is clearly the only running back they trust in this backfield.
Most definitely. And there's no other competition. They haven't brought in any other competition. Deneric Prince, he's becoming a popular name in like the 18th round of underdog drafts. But, ladies and gentlemen, do not worry about Deneric Prince. Isaiah Pacheco is the Prince that you actually want in the Chiefs backfield. Now,
Can I just say
on
real
that
quick?
note, go ahead, chime in. Yes, close us out.
We have all been waiting for like the next Kareem Hunt of the Chiefs offense, where Kareem Hunt, I think it was in 2018, he was the running back 6 in points per game, and because he only played in 11 games. We've been waiting for that. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, this is kind of like a Ram situation where they're only going to use one back. But when Andy Reid finds a guy, he leans on that guy. It worked for Kareem Hunt, and I think we're in for that again this year with Pacheco.
Now, before I get into my first flag plant, not plague plant, goodness, my first flag plant, I'm going to remind the people, you can watch our podcast, listen to our podcast in a variety of ways. First way, you got to watch it on YouTube. All right. You get the wonderful visuals. You get the all 22 film. You get to see Ty, Cam, and I in person make all sorts of disgusting faces when we don't agree, or elated faces when we agree. YouTube.com/@the-fantasy-football-fellas. And make sure you're subscribed as well. We see you all out there. All of you who are watching our show and haven't subscribed yet. I'm looking right at you. Make sure you go hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications as well. You can also tune into our podcast as well if you're in the vehicle. If you're at home showering, don't want to watch a YouTube video, whatever it is, you can listen to our podcast, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. Search Fantasy Football Fellas. Subscribe over there. Leave us a review as well. Helps keep the show chugging along for you all. We're grateful for however you choose to support the show, whether you're watching on YouTube or over on our podcast feed. My first flag plant for this year is Jalen Waddle, the Miami Dolphins. And similar to Ty, I'm just going to choose to keep fantasy football simple. I'm going to draft a good player on a really good NFL team and a really good offense. If you want to go ahead and choose to actively forget how good Jalen Waddle was in 2022 and that he commanded the 10th most targets in the league in his rookie season, that's a choice you can make. I'm not going to make that choice because Jalen Waddle is my number one bounce back candidate this year, because when you actually deep dive into his 2023 numbers, it wasn't all disappointment for the guy. The primary reason why Waddle sunk you last year was because he played 67% or less of the snaps in over half of his games. 8 out of 14 games, he played less than 67% of the snaps. And for comparison, you look back to the year prior, he only played 3 games with less than 67% of the snaps. So just because Waddle was dealing with on and off injuries last year does not mean he's going to continue dealing with them forever, especially when he has given you zero track record to be concerned about in that regard. So Waddle reminded us last year what he's good at. He still ran 2.68 yards per route last year. That was 8th best in the league. He still had 421 yards after the catch. That was 12th best in the league. Remind you, in only 14 games. That number would have been even more had he played 16 games, which he played in his rookie season, 17 games, which he had played the year prior. The Dolphins also lost some key defensive pieces as well, which could prevent the Dolphins from jumping out to early leads, leaning on more pass neutral game script, which they threw in a ton last year, which would only benefit Jalen Waddle. And then you boil in this contingent upside. If Tyreek Hill misses any time, I mean, we're looking at Jalen Waddle then, who's already, going as, the wide receiver 18, 19 in drafts. He immediately jumps into being a top 10 guy and a borderline top 5 guy in this offense. So he is just obvious. He is clearly one of the best targets in the third round of drafts this year, because he possesses the most upside out of any of those guys, And my flag is just firmly planted there in 2024.
Yeah, everyone forgets. Like after it takes one season, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, he's not good anymore. It's like Jalen Waddle's like 24 years old. He's one season removed from being a top 8 wide receiver in PPR formats, right? I mean, it's like, give me a
With
break.
Tyreek Hill there.
Exactly. I mean, Tyreek Hill was the wide receiver 2 that season in 2022. Had 1,700 yards, had 119 receptions, and Jalen Waddle was still a top 10 wide receiver. So you can't say, oh, he doesn't have that upside. He's already done it. In a year where Tua was banged up. Last year, Tua was healthy. He was just Waddle was banged up. If they're both healthy, yeah, he's easily got top 10 upside again. I don't know. It's silly that we just have so many guys that we go, he was hurt. Guess he's not good anymore. It's like, no, he's still the same player, especially when they're this young. So no, I can't agree more. I love watching Waddle slide down the board because it just means, I got to draft him that much more.
I think people forget
the guys that we typically get burned on and we don't want to draft again, like those takes are valid if there's like actual concern around how good of an NFL player they can be in future years. Like I remember people were like, I'm done with Joe Mixon. He's burned me the last few years. There was also plenty of reasons to be concerned about Joe Mixon, right? There was the offensive line. There was efficiency concerns. Waddle has given you none of that other than, well, he was banged up last year. So I think it's silly to be concerned over a guy who has shown us how good of an NFL player he can be after the one season we didn't see him produce to expectations was because he was just nicked up the entire season. Go ahead, Ty. What were you going to chime in with?
I was just going to say, I think people forget just how good that Miami offense was for the first, through their first 12 games of the year, because the last 5 weeks of the season, they were middle of the pack, but the first 12 games of the year, they were first in yards per game. They were second in points per game. Now they did have like that game against Denver where they put up 70, and then they had like a 45-point game against Washington. Like that's not going to happen every single week. So people are kind of expecting them to regress. But if you take 50 yards per game away from them for the first 12 games, they're still top 5. Okay. Like it doesn't sound like a lot, but 50 yards a game over 12 games, that's 700 yards. That's quite a bit. Okay. And then if you were to take away 7 points, if they put up 7 points less per game, they're still top 10 in scoring then. Like this Miami offense, yes, they may not hit they may not hit the ceilings or the limits that they did last year. But if they are going to be consistently in the top 10, why can't Jalen Waddle be a big piece in that? And so for where he goes in drafts, yeah, and you boil in the contingent upside like you were saying too, it makes complete sense that like you should be all in on Waddle this year.
Draft good teams or good players on good teams, excuse me, which Cameron, you might be breaking that rule a little bit with your next flag plant, but honestly, this guy, he might be worth it based on his costs and frankly, your previous love for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you have watched us at all, you knew this one was coming. It's Deontay Johnson. Like I've talked about Deontay Johnson at length, and there's been lots of episodes where I've wanted to talk about Deontay Johnson, and I just haven't because I've talked about him so much prior that I'm just like, the people want to hear about other players. But he's going as a wide receiver 42 right now in the middle of the 8th. Wide receiver 42. And he's similar to Waddle and Murray in the sense that you get banged up for a year and have a down year. People forget how good you are. It's just Deontay Johnson's kind of an unsexy player on a very, very unsexy team. So we forget how good he is. And then you go, he's a PPR guy who is not very explosive. And now he's playing with Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. But last season for the Carolina Panthers, Adam Thielen saw 137 targets, which was shocking to me that he saw that many targets. But he kind of started to fade at the end of the year, which makes sense because he's going into his age 34 season right now, whereas Deontay's going to be 28. In the first 11 weeks last season, Adam Thielen saw 9.7 targets per game. Dude was on pace for 165 targets through the first 11 games. I think that would have made him 4th in the NFL last year. That is a bonkers number for a guy who's going to be 34. And so do I think that Deontay steps in and takes all those targets? No, absolutely not. Obviously, Adam Thielen is still on the team. I don't think Thielen's going to have the same role, but Deontay has commanded a ton of targets before. Before last season, it was 144, 169, 147. And if you remember, 2 years ago when he had 144 targets, he had 0 touchdowns. That's why he was so disappointing for fantasy 2 years in a row. Yes, he had the decent amount of yards. He had the targets. He just was on a team where they didn't score any touchdowns because he had a couple rough seasons for those Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm not saying Carolina is going to be that much better, right? Like I understand the scenario, but Dave Canales is coming off a Tampa Bay team where both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin had 130 plus targets last year. With helping Baker Mayfield take a step forward. If you guys don't remember, before last season, Baker was pretty much left for dead, right? He was in the middle of like, oh, I'm going to LA on 3 days notice to play in a game because they need a third string guy off the street to play. Like that was the situation Baker Mayfield was in, and Dave Canales helped him improve. And the reason I say that is because Bryce Young last season had 2,800 passing yards and 11 passing touchdowns. And that was awful. You can't get much worse than that as a starting quarterback. And Adam Thielen still finished as a top 30 wide receiver. So I think Deontay at this point in his career is better than Thielen was last year. I think Bryce Young can't get any worse. And yet we're drafting Deontay 12 spots below that. And so, yeah, Deontay's a little bit different than everyone on this list because I'm not saying he's going to be a top 10 guy. Right? Everyone else, we're kind of like, I'm drafted because I think he has this crazy upside. I think he has good upside. I think he'd be a top 20 wide receiver. But the value you're getting him at is just ridiculous to me, where I don't see a world where he's not outperforming where you're drafting him. And that's why I can't stop taking him. That's why he's one of my flag plans.
Yeah, I think the question you're asking with Deontay Johnson is, can lightning strike thrice with Dave Canales? He's already done it twice. He did it with Geno Smith up in Seattle, did it with Baker Mayfield down in Tampa Bay. Is he going to bring revival to an abysmal start to the previous number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young, in Carolina? And I think the answer is yes. And he might not even need to make it that significant when you look at how bad it was for Bryce Young last year and what Adam Thielen was still able to do. Now, Adam Thielen is still there. He's still going to factor in, but Ty, I don't think it's any question that Deontay Johnson is very clearly the one in this offense, especially when Dave Canales has already come out and said, yeah, where's Deontay Johnson on the field? We want to get him the ball. Weigh in on Deontay Johnson here because I know he's a guy you like, maybe not as high on as Cameron, but give us the other pros that people are drafting with Deontay Johnson.
It feels like we're kind of doing the Mike Evans treatment to Deontay Johnson. Like, I know that Deontay doesn't have the body of work that Mike Evans does, but when Dave Canales was hired as the offensive coordinator in Tampa and they brought in Baker to be the guy, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not touching this Tampa offense. And Mike Evans still came through and finished as a top 10 guy on the year, right? And if you were to take a look at Deontay Johnson's season last year in Pittsburgh, where it was a disappointment, I'll say a relative disappointment, it was actually a really, really good year for Deontay. And I think it was just kind of being on the wrong side of bad quarterback play, because you take a look at his at reception perception. We've mentioned Matt Harmon's work over there. It is a thing of beauty for wide receivers. If you look at his success by route, it is a Christmas tree. The thing is all green. The guy is a separator. He gets open. He's got an 81st percentile success rate against man, 82nd against zone, 85th against press. So I think a lot of people could be looking at Deontay Johnson and have this notion that he's just a slot-only wide receiver. The dude is clearly not. The dude can get open no matter where he lines up on the field. He lined up out wide in Pittsburgh 78% of the time. Like he's not a slot exclusive guy. So when Dave Canales is quite literally coming out in his press conferences and saying like, yeah, we're looking for where Deontay Johnson is on the field and we're going to try to get him the ball. The dude's not joking because he knows that Deontay Johnson can get open. So yes, it's a very unsexy team. Like you mentioned, it's Carolina. Who knows how many points that they're going to be able to put up. This might just be one of those, like, you're not going to watch the games, but you know that he's going to just stuff the stat line. And he's, because of the skill set, because of that kind of situation where he is the one in Carolina, there's no way that he doesn't outperform where he goes in drafts.
Y'all want to take a guess where Mike Evans was being drafted last year? I think that's an intriguing thought experiment, Ty, because you brought it up and I'm like, that's a fascinating comparison, but I went and took a look at the ADP while you were talking there. Take a guess at where Mike Evans was being drafted in PPR formats last year.
It was silly, wasn't it? Wasn't it? It wasn't even.
36.
Oh no, he's past the 4th round, wasn't he? Where was he? I don't even remember.
Are you talking 36 overall?
Like wide receiver 36.
So wide receiver 36, Cameron, what's your guess?
I'd say 5th round.
Mike Evans was going as the wide receiver 32 in drafts last year. Now, that being said, Deontay going as a wide receiver 42, I don't think any of us are going to sit here and say, hey, you should expect a top 12 season like Mike Evans gave you from Deontay Johnson. But what we are saying is, you know what, at wide receiver 42, this man could literally drown in targets from Bryce Young. And we could get a top 20 season out of Deontay Johnson. That is not out of the world of possibility. So Cameron has him as his second flag plant. Ty, before we get to yours, why don't we go ahead, take a quick break? We'll be back with 5 more flag plants afterwards. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, where it is best ball summer. There are 5 core best ball tournaments to play in with over $20 million up for grabs this summer. You can even take a crack at winning the top prize of $1.5 million in their infamous Best Ball Mania 5 contest. To enter, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use the code FELLAS to get a first deposit bonus up to $250 and our 2024 draft guide for free. Again, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use code FELLAS to sign up. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit npcgambling.org. Alrighty, we are back. We have gone through our first 4 flag plants. Cameron's have been Kyler Murray and Deontay Johnson. Mine was Jalen Waddle. Tyler, you started with Isaiah Pacheco. And now, who is your second flag plant for the 2024 season?
Anthony Richardson. There really is no discount on Anthony Richardson this year, but I really don't care. Like, a guy that is going in the 5th round that has overall quarterback 1 upside at his position. That was a little redundant. Who could finish as the top player at his position this year. That's what I meant to say. Anthony Richardson is an absolute cheat code of a player. Okay. He's 6'4". He's 244 pounds. When we're talking rushing quarterbacks, this is not your Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, who are built kind of like twigs that can get hurt at any given moment if they're not careful. Okay. So the idea that Anthony Richardson is like built of glass, that he's injury prone, that he's more susceptible to getting hurt again, it doesn't line up with his size. Like, we may be talking about that when he's like 29, 30, 31, but the dude is just 23 years old. Okay. He's in the prime of his youth at this point. And the other thing is, you're not drafting Anthony Richardson for his arm. You're drafting him for his rushing ability and his legs. Brett Coleman was on the Underdog football show with Josh Norris and Hayden Winks, and he said it perfectly. Anthony Richardson is not raw. He is just inexperienced, and there is a major difference between the two. Anthony Richardson was born to play quarterback, and he just so happens to be a stud athlete who, with his speed and strength, is just a cheat code of a player, okay? You combine that with Shane Steichen, head coach of the Colts. They were 3rd in pace of play last year. That just leads to more opportunities to rack up fantasy points because you have more plays than expected. Like I said, Anthony Richardson has quarterback 1 overall upside this year before getting hurt in week 5 last year. So weeks 1 through 4, Anthony Richardson was the quarterback 3 in fantasy points per game with 23.1. There's no concerns with the shoulder from the team so far this offseason. They are expecting he has been full go. Teams can't stack the box against the Colts because of their weapons with Michael Pittman, with Josh Downs, with A.D. Mitchell now in town. And we joke around and say that Alec Pierce is the cardio king of the NFL. You have to account for Alec Pierce still, okay? And again, you can't stack the box because Steichen, with his background, right, coming from Philly, with RPOs, mobile quarterbacks, defenses will have their hands full with this Colts offense. I really think this unit can be a top 5 scoring unit in the league. Why can't Anthony Richardson be the quarterback 1 overall in that kind of situation? So for a guy, like I said, who averaged 23 fantasy points per game, who could average 22 this year if he stays fully healthy, and I shouldn't say if, when he stays fully healthy, it's a smash pick every time for me in the 5th round.
6'4", 244 dudes are not made of glass. Okay. That is a massive dude playing the quarterback position who is a freak athlete. He is a 99th percentile athlete at the quarterback position. These are not dudes you say that they're made of glass. So the whole injury prone narrative just goes out the door for me because it's literally been one season and it was a shoulder injury of all things, right? It wasn't this lower body injury. It wasn't an ACL. It wasn't. Anthony Richardson is going to be just fine this year. So Cameron, I'll ask you the question that Ty just asked. Why can't Anthony Richardson be the overall quarterback 1 this year?
It's just going to come down to passing, right? Can he be a good enough passer in the NFL to go along with the rushing upside? Because the rushing upside is going to be there. And like you said, he's huge. He's bigger than Fred Warner is. Fred Warner's 6'3", 236, right? So, he's got 10 pounds and an inch. Right? So, he's bigger than most linebacker he's facing. So, the rushing upside is going to be there with the as good of an athlete he is. It's just, can the passing volume, can he throw enough touchdowns? Can he get, like we were talking about with Kyler, if he can hit 3,800 passing yards and 22 passing touchdowns, with his rushing upside, with the amount of touchdowns this guy could score on the ground, he could easily be in the quarterback 1 overall, conversation. It's just, as long as he can get there, right? As long as he can prove enough that he's that capable of a quarterback, yeah, he's got that upside. It's just, even without it though, his floor is top 10, right? His floor, like that's crazy to say, but it's true. Like if the passing is just not there at all, he's Justin Fields. Right. Maybe not as many yards, but he makes up for it with the amount of touchdowns he's going to score.
When he was healthy last year, his completion percentage, I feel like we've mentioned this before, 59.5%. And he was still a quarterback 3 in points per game. So yeah, the benchmark realistically 3,600 yards, probably 20 passing touchdowns. Why can't he hit that again with the coach that he has in Shane Steichen, with the weaponry that he has around him? If you honestly believe that he can't hit that, right, with his rushing upside, it purely is because you just don't think that Anthony Richardson can play the quarterback position. I think all 3 of us say yes, he can, and he's going to be one of the better ones in the near future.
This whole anti-Anthony Richardson, outside of the injury concern from last year, just feels a lot like the Jalen Hurts march from seasons ago, where it was like, well, are we sure he's really mobile, but are we sure he can play the quarterback position? You want to know what Jalen Hurts did? He broke fantasy football because of how freaking mobile he is. Now you get a bigger, better athlete than Jalen Hurts playing the quarterback position with, as you said, Ty, Shane Steichen, who, turned Jalen Hurts into what he is today. So being the quarterback 1 in fantasy points per drop back last year, on top of all of that, Anthony Richardson is a dream pick in the 5th round this year, especially if you've loaded up early on positions of need. If you've tripled down on wide receivers and have a stud running back early, yeah, go ahead and take yourself some Anthony Richardson in the 5th, because he could end up being the quarterback 1 overall this year, and you don't have to spend a 2nd round pick on Josh Allen, a 3rd round pick on Jalen Hurts. And yeah, Anthony Richardson is one of our favorite players, hands down, to draft this year. My 2nd flag plant, excuse me. Sticking at the wide receiver position, DK Metcalf. This is a player who I have been gushing over all off season. I absolutely love the upside that he possesses in Ryan Grubb's offense. He is a dream fit for what Ryan Grubb does out of Washington. Grubb had the Huskies ranked 9th in pass rate and 4th in deep pass rate in the entire nation last season, through an offense that was super creative, super modern, and not this like gimmicky can only work at the college level kind of way. They throw the ball a ton. They want to push the ball downfield. So when I see that DK Metcalf has finished top 12 in both air yards and deep targets each of the last 4 years, I just can't help but be optimistic about his situation in this offense. I also think the Seattle Seahawks pass attempts go way up this year in terms of, on a per game basis. They were never higher than 15th per game under Shane Waldron. So again, this is just a player that I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I'm not going to forget that he is a very good football player that has commanded targets in the past. He's commanded 141 targets in a season. He's gone for over 1,300 yards in a season. He's gone for 17 yards per reception in a season and has been a red zone monster throughout his career. So when you bring in a pass happy offense, I think Geno Smith is also just criminally underrated. I mean, first in completion percentage over expected since he took over the starting gig in Seattle. This is a guy where I think Ryan Grubb can make some magic happen here in Seattle, bring some revival to this offense. And as much as I love JSN this year as well as a late round pick, like DK Metcalf in the 4th round just feels like an absolute no-brainer steal for me this year when I think he legitimately has top 12 upside.
Yeah, I mean, he's one that you just look at DK, right? And you just watch him play, and you're like, this is a guy who could break football at any moment. I mean, he
This
is
is a man. That is a grown man on the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to AJ Brown, right? I mean, he's just bigger, he's faster, he's stronger than everybody else on the field. And so if you get a coach who can actually figure out how to get Geno to give him the ball consistently, at all areas of the field, because it feels like last year he was strictly the down the field guy. And then it felt like the year before he was strictly the, like safety blanket for Geno. Like if we can get it where DK can get receptions all over the field, this dude is going to be phenomenal for fantasy football. And, we've been out on him in years past, but it's because his ADP was ridiculous. Well, now his ADP is ridiculous the other way, where it's kind of like, well, how can you not draft him where he's at? That's how I feel about DK Metcalf right now.
Ty, what about you? Chime in on DK Metcalf because he was a guy you didn't bring up before the show started on the podcast format. Again, we brought up a few players who missed the cutover on our podcast as well, where you get the full edition, so you can go check that out. But he was a guy that you didn't mention, but in our group chat, you're like, yeah, I might take him. I said, no, I'm going to take him. So go ahead. You can add on to my affection for DK Metcalf here.
You went full, what movie is that with the Somali pirates? Like, I'm the captain now. That's what you went. Taking DK Metcalf from me. The worst finish on a per game basis for DK over the last 4 years is the wide receiver 24. He's being drafted. I don't know. Is it fair to say he's being drafted at his floor? Because that's kind of what it feels like this year.
What it feels like.
Honestly, like the problem with the big play downfield threats is that you're probably going to get some inconsistencies. That's fine, because that on any given week, DK could probably give you like 24, 25, right? Like, we are all projecting the Seattle offense to bounce back. And if it bounces back like we expect it to, DK Metcalf should be closer to a top 15 wide receiver than he should a top 20 or top 25 wide receiver. So again, you're getting a little bit of a discount on a guy like DK Metcalf, whose situation got better. So, I don't want to sit here and say, like, I don't understand why he's going later, because there are reasons for it. But I think the pros outweigh the cons here.
Right. And we can go through and rattle off the cons, the emergence of JSN this year, the uncertainty of a Ryan Grubb college offensive system translating to the NFL. Is Geno actually the guy you want? And can they make magic happen without Dave Canales? Right. I get it. There's a lot of questions there, but my process this year has been refined in some element to, I just want players that I know are good NFL athletes, that I believe are going to be good that are going to be in good offensive systems, that have the opportunity to just smash their ADPs this year. And that's really the logic behind both Jalen Waddle and DK Metcalf as my first two flag plants this year. Fellas, let's bring it home. We each have one more flag plant to share with the people. Cameron, so far, you have brought up Kyler Murray, you had brought up Deontay Johnson. I'm super excited for the people to hear your last guy because I don't know if they're going to see this one coming.
I'm putting my big boy underwear on, and I'm doing it. And I don't care what you have to say. I'm going with Kyle Pitts. I still haven't learned. I still haven't learned the saying of "fool me once, shame on me." I don't know it anymore. I've tried it like 7 times on the show whenever I'm talking about Kyle Pitts. I don't know it yet, but just if you know it, just kind of insert it here and pretend I'm saying it right now. First of all, Kyle Pitts is younger than every top 15 tight end in ADP other than Sam Laporta and Brock Bowers right now. That includes Dalton Kincaid and Trey McBride. Both are older than Kyle Pitts. He has more receiving yards than any other tight end before their 24th birthday, except for Gronk and Jason Witten. Shout out to the Fantasy Footballers Twitter account for that one. I came across that as I was doing my notes, and I was like, oh, this inserts perfectly here. He has the second most receiving yards ever by a rookie tight end, and he had 130 more yards as a rookie than Sam Laporta did on 18 less receptions. So we thought Sam Laporta had a great year last year. Kyle Pitts' rookie year, he had 130 more receiving yards, 18 less receptions. And the big thing for Kyle Pitts has been his quarterback play. I just don't think we can understate how bad it's been in Atlanta. Over the last 3 years, the quarterbacks have combined in Atlanta over 3 years for 10,689 yards and 54 touchdowns. In his last two healthy seasons, so I'm not counting last year because he missed 8 games, but his last 2 healthy seasons, Kirk Cousins has thrown for 8,800 yards and 62 touchdowns. He has 8 more touchdowns in the last 2 years than all the Atlanta Falcons quarterbacks combined in the last 3 seasons, and he's only down by less than 2,000 yards on them in 2 seasons. Like, this dude is almost doing it in 2 years what the whole team did in 3. So it's just ridiculous. And speaking of Cousins, in his last 3 seasons, 24% of his passes have gone to the tight end position. Well, that sounds pretty good for Kyle Pitts. So he throws a lot more, he scores a lot more touchdowns, and he throws to the tight end. Sounds like a pretty good situation. And if you're like, well, I still don't know about Kyle Pitts. This dude was first in ADOT last year, first in air yard share, first in areas, first in unrealized air yards, first in deep targets, 4th in yards per reception, and 3rd in slot snaps. So what does that mean for me? That means he has highly efficient targets. That means he was used in the slot already. I'm sure they're going to continue to move him in the slot. They've been trying to figure out how to just use him as a wide receiver already. I don't know. I'm getting hot and bothered by Kyle Pitts. If you can't tell, it's just getting me, like, I'm enthusiastic right now. Like, I'm feeling good. I just went out in our dynasty league and acquired Kyle Pitts in a 7-player trade. So yeah, I see the upside. I think he's starting to prove it on the field. Has proved enough on the field that now we go, hey, look at this upgrade. He doesn't have Arthur Smith. He doesn't have Desmond Ridder. He doesn't have whoever ever else was there. This dude can finally ball out, and this is the season where it happens.
Kyle Pitts could be the guy. Kyle Pitts could be the guy that we look back on at the end of the season and we think, why in the world did we not include him in that upper echelon of tight ends this year? The top 5 that we have: Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid. He could be the guy we look at and we're like, why didn't we consider him in this tier? Because you're right, it could be the year we see the athletic freak. It could be. You're just far more brave than I am. Ty, what is your level of confidence in Kyle Pitts? Because it's one thing to be hot and bothered by him. It's also one thing to back that up and like Cameron said, go out and acquire him. Go out and draft 20% of him in best ball drafts this year. What's your level of confidence in Kyle Pitts compared to what you project his upside to be?
Gosh, I hate this kind of question because it not only puts you on the spot, but you're like, gosh, you got to take everything into account. I'm fairly confident in Kyle Pitts this year. I've mentioned before to you guys, in this kind of Sean McVay tree, they like to move their players around. Maybe it's in pre-snap motions, or maybe it's just formation changes where you can take a guy. I think it was Liam Cohen who actually said it in like his Tampa press conference. he literally rattled off like 3 different formations or 3 different like concepts or packages or whatever. And he's like, we've already moved Cooper Kupp like 3 different spots, lickety split. It's like, okay, wait a second. So you have an X wide receiver in Drake London. Maybe he stays on the outside a little bit more. So then who's kind of the next up? Is it Kyle Pitts? Like you're going to be moving Kyle Pitts around the formation for a guy, again, that's kind of this hybrid kind of receiver that is not your traditional tight end. Like, gosh, that plays into Kyle Pitts' favor. And I think people forget too. Last year, Kyle Pitts was not healthy. Okay. He was playing after getting his MCL and PCL surgically repaired. So he's only playing at 80% in an Arthur Smith offense where he's not being utilized to the fullest extent that a guy like Kyle Pitts should be. I it feels weird to call Kyle Pitts a bounce back just because he hasn't really delivered the past 2 years. But I kind of want to say like this might be the biggest bounce back that we see this year because it hasn't worked out the past 2 years. And if it works out this year, Kyle Pitts could absolutely be one of the best values and steals of drafts.
Absolutely could be dead wrong on Kyle Pitts this year. He could make that leap to the upper echelon of tight ends this year. Cameron's just braver than all of us to do it. I am not quite that brave to make that leap. But Tyler, your final flag plant here is, I'm going to spoil the position a little bit, is a guy who you think will take a tier jump this year. And you have also talked a lot about this player, have expressed your love plenty for this player. Who is your final flag plant?
Jake Turd Ferguson. Okay. Turd is a movie reference for those that don't get it. Because I recently discovered that it's like, so a lot of people are calling Jake Ferguson Turd Ferguson in a way that doesn't speak favorably of him. And I kind of want to turn that for good. But I said I was fairly confident in Kyle Pitts. I'm very confident in Jake Ferguson this year. Okay. And I know that ADPs really don't like matter here, but for the fact that Jake Ferguson is going 3 full rounds after Kyle Pitts this year, yeah, like Jake Ferguson probably can't finish like top 5 this year.
All right.
Well,
Didn't know we're pulling out the box.
Fight words.
All right. I mean, I didn't know you wanted to start something here, Ty.
I want the smoke. If you take a look at last year though with Jake Ferguson, the guy was 7th in targets and he was 1st in red zone targets. He was top 12 in slot snaps. I didn't realize that. That's a pretty cool stat for a guy like Jake Ferguson. And he was 3rd in routes run. For the utilization that he had last year, he was 1st in expected touchdowns per game, tied with Travis Kelce. Okay. People will point out amongst the leaders and expected points added, talking about just how efficient last year was for Jake Ferguson. But that came from the fact that he finished with almost 100 yards more than expected. And that's likely from being 6th in yards after the catch. So this is not your traditional just kind of set up in the middle of the defense and just kind of catch and just fall forward or anything like that. Jake Ferguson is a legit receiving threat in this Dallas Cowboys offense. Last year, this offense was 3rd in passing yards per game. They were 1st in passing touchdowns. Yeah, they may take a little bit of a step back because they just don't have a rushing game this year compared to what they've had in previous seasons. But we are all expecting this Dallas Cowboys team to go through Dak, to go through the passing attack. Why can't Jake Ferguson become the number 2 option in this Dallas Cowboys offense? Because if that happens, Jake Ferguson, I would not be surprised, is closer to the top 5 tight ends than he is where he goes right now in drafts, closer to the top 10 range. So, like I said, I'm fairly confident in Kyle Pitts. I'm very confident in Jake Ferguson.
If the Dallas Cowboys have told us anything this offseason is that they're not afraid to huck the rock around the yard again this year. Did not address many needs on the offensive line, did not address many needs in the running back room, did not address any other pass catchers as well. It's CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, Brandon Cooks. So I agree. Why can't Jake Ferguson be the second best pass catcher, the second best target in this offense, who scored nearly 4 less touchdowns than expected based on his usage last year? Cameron, I know you still prefer Kyle Pitts to Jake Ferguson, but Do you share in Ty's love, or what is the cap on his upside for you?
So I think Ferguson's a guy where where the ceiling is like 13 fantasy points per game, which for a tight end and where you're drafting him would be awesome, right? That from in a PPR perspective. Like the reason that I think Kyle Pitts is different real quick is just because I think like the cap is he could be like what Kittle or Kelsey is in their best season. Like that's the ceiling. I'm not saying that's where Pitts gets to, but that's the difference. But I think it's more likely, probably, that Ferguson hits his ceiling than Pitts hits his ceiling. Like I'm not saying that I think Ferguson outscores him, but to be in an offense where he could be the second best pass catcher with Dak Prescott, Dak Prescott's been awesome for fantasy football his entire career, and he's rewarded the tight end position. So, yeah, I think as long as he's healthy and as long as he, continues to do more of the same what we saw last season, there's no reason to think he's not going to be one of the most consistent tight ends that you can probably draft outside of those top 3 or 4 or 5 tight ends.
Now, the transition to our final flag plant, my final flag plant. Now, the other two fellows have no clue who this flag plant is. We've all been aware of each other's flag plants. And I went down to the wire on this flag plant, fellas. You know that. I've been wrestling all afternoon trying to figure out who is my final flag plant going to be. And then it dawned on me. What if I told you my final flag plant is also a tight end this year? My final flag plant is Trey McBride, the Arizona Cardinals. I have had such a hard time resisting him this year because I always end up preferring him to Mark Andrews in the 4th round. When it goes around that 3-4 turn and I start a draft with an Amon Ra and then a Kyron Williams, a Cooper Kupp in the 3rd round, and then I see Trey McBride in the 4th, I cannot resist it because you look at offensive coordinator Drew Petzing. He stems from this Kevin Stefanski, Cleveland Browns coaching tree, right? Where they just pepper the tight ends with targets. They feed their tight ends. They are some well-fed boys in this system. McBride drew a target on over 26% of his targets last year, which was the best of all tight ends in the league. So just because this team adds Marvin Harrison Jr. this offseason, I actually don't think Trey McBride takes much of a step back, especially when you look at the other target competition on this team. I mean, it's Michael Wilson, it's Greg Dortch, it's Zay Jones. Like, they're all nice little players here, but I just don't, none of them, I can't even say I don't think, none of them can hold a candle to Trey McBride as a receiver. So last year, Trey McBride drew a 19.6% target share. I have him all the way up at a 23% target share this year. He's still going to be a feature piece in this offense. He's still going to be top 3 in yards per route run at the position, and he's almost certainly going to score more than 3 touchdowns this year. He scored 3 last year and 1 in his rookie season. So I think there is a legit chance you can draft the overall tight end 1 this year in the 4th round, because I have McBride now as my tight end 2 ahead of Sam Laporta. So my flag is firmly planted. Coming in hot to close out the episode. Go ahead. Tell me why I'm wrong.
I like it. I like Trey McBride, and especially when you talk about compared to Mark Andrews, because I love Mark Andrews. But this Cardinals team threw the ball 60 more times than the Ravens did last year. That's 60 more opportunities for Trey McBride to get the ball in his hands than Mark Andrews has. So I just think I love the Cardinals offense. I'm all in on them. So I have nothing bad to say here. I believe in Trey McBride. It's just, yes, it's how hot do you want to get with McBride? Like, does he have a shot to be the overall tight end overall tight end 1 this year? Absolutely, he does. Everybody, like, I think Kelsey's at the age where he's not quite, Sam Laporta's coming off 10 touchdowns last year. Can he keep that up? Could Trey McBride see 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns this year? 100%. And am I saying he's going to? No, but I think he definitely has that upside. So I'm with you here.
So Ty is the notorious Trey McBride hater. He has been the notorious Trey McBride hater since our projections finished for the 2024 season. So go ahead, Ty. Throw your counter punches here. I'll take you down like Drickus Duplessis did with Israel Adesanya, the previous notorious counter striker himself. Go ahead, fire back.
Problem is, you're gonna have to knock me out like Leon did to Usman. You're not gonna get me to submit to a rear naked choke. Come on now, guy. So I do want to clarify. I still got Trey McBride as a top 5 guy this year. The slandering of my name with Trey McBride, I do want to just say, can go overboard. Is warranted. It can go overboard a little bit. It's just because I don't see completely eye to eye with these guys. But I think when it comes to Trey McBride, for me, I just kind of look at the entirety of the tight end landscape and I go, okay, typically the best tight ends are the guys that are likely the number one option in their offense, right? So we're talking about the Travis Kelce's and the Mark Andrews of the world. Like Dalton Kincaid, we haven't seen it just yet. That's a very outside shot because we would all say that he's probably the number one option in Buffalo this year. The next best below that is your tight end being the number 2 option in really good offenses. That's where we find Sam Laporta. It's where we are kind of projecting Kyle Pitts to be this year. It's where I project Jake Ferguson to be. And I think this is where we're saying this is where Trey McBride will be as well. I think the thing is, like, when I you know what, I'm kind of actually realizing that, like, we've only seen, like, with Isaiah Pacheco, like, he hasn't, like, been a, like, top 10 guy yet. And that's kind of where we're projecting him to be. And, like, we haven't seen Trey McBride be a top 5 guy. That's kind of where we're projecting him to be. So, you know what? Like, you know what? I'm completely fine with it. It's like, yeah, like, Trey McBride's a great guy. Yeah, you target him in fantasy.
Great guy here, Trey McBride. But I do think I think you bring up a valid point though, Ty, of like when you get past Travis Kelce, like all the guys you look at after that, they're the second options in their offense. The thing that I think you can separate from a Trey McBride and Sam Laporta though is that Amon-Ra has been an established clear alpha in that offense for 2 years now. I'm not saying Marv isn't going to be an alpha, but like there is at least a rookie learning curve here that Marv is going to have in front of him. And I'm not going to say that's going to hang around the entire season. Marv is probably only going to need like 3-4 weeks until he's like, yep, I'm good. Throw me the football. But that's also a window where Trey McBride can still be perfectly relevant in this offense. And again, at just shy of a 30% target share, I have Trey McBride just ahead of Sam Laporta in my rankings. It is neck and neck between the two, but I do have Trey McBride officially ranked ahead of Sam Laporta by just a smidge in my projections. So there you have it. 9 players we are all in on. Our flags are planted. Are my guys for the 2024 fantasy football season. I kind of want to do like carousel posts of all these players over on our social media for the people who didn't get to catch the pod later on. Let us know in the comments who you love that we've planted our flag on. Let us also know if you're like, Lucas is an idiot for thinking DK Metcalf is going to be good under Ryan Grubb. I don't care what you put down there. Let us know. We want to hear your thoughts. Who are your flags firmly planted on this season for fantasy football? You can follow us over on the socials as well. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook and TikTok. Make sure to give our personals a follow as well. I am at Lucas Wenzel on X, Camlaw FFF for Cameron, and Tyler_Plath for Tyler. If you love this episode, you're going to love tomorrow's episode too. We're going through our favorite picks in every round of your fantasy football drafts because we know they're coming up this weekend. So make sure you tune in tomorrow. Make sure you're subscribed. Again, we see you all over there on YouTube. Those of you who are tuning in, watching the show and aren't subscribed yet, make sure you do that. Turn on those notifications. Same for you over on the podcast as well. Subscribe, turn on those notifications. Leave us a nice little review. We'll see y'all next time. Deuces.
Deuces.